birthday, Armstrong.
Happy birthday on the air. Oh, my goodness.
Present to you your birthday cake and
Oh,
say happy birthday.
Look at this on my birthday.
You can eat it as soon as the show
I assumed everyone forgot my birthday.
Awesome.
Oh, look at that, beautiful. That is so beautiful. Thank you. Thank you. I said, is the show about to go live? 80 Morgan on the stage.
That's
That's pretty good. That's pretty good. And it is my birthday, but anyhow. Dayvon, you and Sadiq gets to share my anniversary of my birth today. Well, welcome to the broadcast. Thank you so much for joining us. You know, Sadiq, you've been a part of our broadcast for such a long time.
That's right.
And it's just so good to have you on. And you're still mentoring. And you and Dayvon have this new program called The Rite of Passage. Young men, and especially black men, who helps them sort of transition, because young black men go through so many transitions throughout their lifetime. And sometimes in these transitions, sometimes they get lost.
That's right.
Sometimes they die. Sometimes they find themselves locked up. But sometimes they find people who can give them the kind of attention, the kind of love, the kind of nurturing that can help them find what it means to be a man.
Absolutely.
What it means to be worthy of something, because these young men have oftentimes been so damaged. And so I think the work that you're doing, particularly with these young brothers, is so important. So the rite of passage is something that is as old as civilization. Anyway, talk about the rites of passage and how all that came about and the implications of what that really means for all of us.
Yeah, no, thank you so much. Happy birthday to you as well.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, but I think you teed it up really, really nicely in that rites of passage, it really represents a formal process to move from one stage of life to the next. And most cultures, most organized civilizations, societies, et cetera, have some process by which they move young people into adulthood. And that is a community-driven process more often than not. And in the African-American community, we've lost that process. So the work that we're doing with the Baltimore Rites of Passage Initiative is a means to reintroduce the Rites of Passage framework, especially from an African-centered perspective, back into community for young men. Because again, you hit the nail on the head. The Rite of Passage too often these days has been incarceration. It has been a number of ills that society has poured upon our young black men. And this is an opportunity for us to reclaim that and for us to begin reintegrating and reintroducing the sort of ancient technology of people of African descent into Baltimore communities.
You know, Dayvon, this brings me to something that actually is fascinating. Do you think these young black men are the same no matter where they are, whether it's Baltimore, Los Angeles, Chicago, Washington, D.C., Atlanta, any of these places that have a very high concentration of young black men? Do you think the circumstances are better in some, let's say, zip codes, some geographical locations better than others? Are we to assume that this is pervasive wherever you find an overwhelming number of young black men? And if that is the case, why is that so?
Well, Dr. Amos Wilson, in his book, Black on Black Violence, and I'm paraphrasing, one of the things that he once said is that the phenomena of violence and crime in our communities by young black men is the externalization of a suicidal impulse in a society that tells their young people that they're inherently criminals, that they're thugs, and they look around and see a society that reflects their worthlessness or their perceived worthlessness. Then they internalize that, and it impacts the way that they interact with the rest of society. And unfortunately, like, this network has perpetuated notions around like criminal violence of young people, you know, in Baltimore City, has advanced a narrative that would cause young people to see themselves as inherently violent, where the majority of our young people are doing amazing things. And so one of the things that Rites of Passage is about is reintroducing young people to the fact that they come from a people that they should be proud of, to provide the self-concept and self-love. But unfortunately, we look at the policies, the way that the criminal justice system has been weaponized against young black boys, right? And there's a history of that weaponization. What that does is it creates a context where the policies, even in our own legislature, right, even in the state where we have people putting out misinformation about young people, putting out the most extreme versions and narratives of violence and brutality and criminality in ways that paint with a broad brush, the young people and young black boys in cities across the United States. So I would argue that it is those master narratives that are supported by networks like this and Sinclair Broadcasting that has created an environment where young people see that, and they're reflecting back in many instances what it is that society is projecting onto them.
So do you lay that strictly at the feet of media?
Well, not strictly. It's an extension of the larger system of white supremacy.
Is there anybody else that bears any responsibility in how they feel about themselves? Maybe the home, maybe people that have mentored them along the way, maybe the things that have been exposed to. I do understand that the media sometimes can play a role in how someone feels about their self-worth, but I don't want somebody watching this broadcast today to think that the only reason this happens because of what happens in the broadcast spectrum. It has to do much more than that.
It's an extension of the system of white supremacy. When you think about the policies that were put in place, you think about the war on drugs and the way that it was a part of the Republican strategy to criminalize drug use, to criminalize things that really are a public health issue.
But Joe Biden and Bill Clinton were very strong advocates of the crime bill.
Absolutely.
Why do you just lay it at the feet? Why are we making this into a Republican or Democrat?
No, I'm on the record as one of the biggest critics of the Democratic Party in the state of Maryland in the fact
so
that
the issue we're talking about are policies.
Right, I'm not mentioning a political party. I'm saying that liberals
and
Republican.
conservatives. No, you said Republican.
No, I'm saying in terms of the history of the Republican strategy that launched the war on drugs. The Clinton administration was an even bigger perpetuator in terms of its policy. So it is both. But part of what I'm saying is that when we talk about young black boys and your question about why it is that boys in all these different cities around the country and the conditions that they're in, we're saying that the policies, that there's been bipartisan consensus. And like I said, I'm on the record as being critical of the Democratic Party leadership in this state and projecting itself as more progressive than it is. And one of the big things that we're fighting against is a juvenile crime bill that the leadership in this legislature is putting forward. And so, but this network has perpetrated the propaganda that is launched and made the pressure on folks to put those policies that impact our young people.
Why don't you tell us what that propaganda is?
Well, the propaganda, notions of inherent black pathology and inferiority, that what happens is you put out a story that has the most extreme versions of criminality, things that are real things that happen in our community. We put out those narratives. Those are the ones that sell. Those are the ones that people see. But people don't see the stories of young people for whom their entrance into the criminal justice system is a fight that got out of control. They're not a murderer or a thug. They just got into a fight, or they're in a community where they have a firearm because they want protection. They feel like that's the way they protect themselves. And those young people, because of the narratives that are out there on the media, on this network, around projecting those people as the most horrible people, right? That all those other folks for whom there's much more of them, there are much more of them for whom get swept up into the criminal justice system than those that are the narratives that we see every day.
So let me come back to you then. So 90% of the crimes are committed by 10% of the people. I agree that there are people that can and should be rehabilitated. But there are people, and I don't really care about the race, it's their behavior that have been shown that they're not going to rehabilitate. And these young people don't destroy what you consider to be the supremacists. It's their own neighborhoods. People that look like them, who feel threatened, who live in fear, the carjacking, the car theft, the rape, the homicide, the sexual trafficking. I think that you are saying on a larger scale, overall, there's so many positive things that you can put on the air, but there is an element of society that sometimes rehabilitation does not work.
Right.
And to protect the greater good, some people need to be locked up and face jail time.
Right. And no one on the side of my argument would say that people who commit heinous crimes don't belong in prison. My argument is that those narratives are made more available to people in ways that cause people to put policies that make young people more susceptible to the criminal justice system and make the problem worse. The other thing I'll say too is, because I'm not saying it's just media, I'm saying media is an extension of a larger system where young people, whether they look around, they just look at their communities, they see things that reinforce the notion that they are worthless. It reinforces and I'm saying the system of white supremacy about internalizing notions of worthlessness. And that's why I used the Amos Wilson clip in the quote in the beginning to say that when you don't value yourself, when you don't have a sense of self-love, self-knowledge, when you don't have that, it's easy to harm people that look like you. And I'm saying that a lot of young people are engaged in that.
Let me interject again there. It would seem to me, Sadiq, and you're an example of this, what would have the greatest impact on any boy's self-esteem and self-worth is not the media, but the images they have in the home. You're a father. And the impact that you have in your home as a father outweighs anything else that society can have on that child. And at some point, we must admit that the fact of the breakdown of the family and the father, because a lot of these boys live in fear. They don't know what it's like to be a man. They never had the example. They never had been able to be held accountable, you know. And at some point, you've got to look back to the family and say, what roles do the fathers and the families and the community and the churches play in the development of these kids? I mean, I understand the narrative about the media. That's easy. And I don't apologize for that, but that's easy. But there's so much more to it. What about the fatherless households and the role it plays?
Yeah, no, I think I appreciate that question. I think it goes kind of hand in hand with Dayvon's comments around there were policies put in place that aided in the destruction of the black family. Let's be very, very clear about that. Now that we are where we are, and again, I think the historical context and the look back is critical to make sure that we don't perpetuate the same missteps when we come up with solutions in the future. So that's why the historical context is critical. But what I will say, we are where we are now, and the most immediate, the closest thing we have to a magic potion, absolutely is the recalibration of the black family. It is the sort of calibration of community to sort of jump in with the village mentality that we absolutely know works. That sort of brings us full circle to this idea of rites of passage, and that this is about a group of men in community rallying around a group of young people in order to put in place what has been taken away. So absolutely, family is a critical part of it. Men have to be present for their families. But again, we can't ignore what sort of got us in the space to begin with.
Aideen is my executive producer. We went to Edwin Avent's school today. A school about 300 or 400 young black men. And he only has about 13 to 15 teachers in the entire school. But what he has been able to do to teach them about self-worth, value, about learning, about education, their confidence, their self-esteem, the way they speak, the way they introduce their classroom, it was just absolutely riveting. And all these kids need is a little attention. And you don't even find men in the classroom anymore. You may find them in sports, but they're nowhere to be found. But when men can see examples of someone like Edwin, who graduated from Cornell, that's very important to the piece. These kids can be saved, but the problem is it requires so much time, so much nurturing, because you have to become so many things to these kids, especially these young men, but they can be saved. But the community and the families also play a very pivotal role in this process. I'm Armstrong Williams. This is Your Voice, Your Future. Dayvon and Sadiq and I will be back after this commercial break. Don't go away. How do we get the rites of passage, Sadiq, to evolve in the larger community, where it becomes like a fire that can never go out?
Ooh, I'm glad you asked that. So a little bit about the Baltimore Rites of Passage Initiative. This is a multi-year grant-funded initiative that's being funded by the Baltimore Children and Youth Fund. $13 million annual non-lapsing fund that sort of grew out of the Freddie Gray murder that took place here in Baltimore City. This is a project that's also powered by another local nonprofit organization called Mentor Maryland, DC. But the whole objective is to scale rites of passage across the Baltimore City and to reach as many young people as possible. So the way we've laid out this particular project and initiative is that first and foremost is multi-generational, and it begins with training men on how to actually be in community with young men. First, we take this group of young men or older men, and we take them through a rites of passage process as men. Because again, there's lots of grown men walking around that have never been through a rites of passage process. So it then becomes difficult for them to be able to walk a young man or a boy through that process as well. So we're starting off taking a group of men through rites of passage. We're training them along the way to administer African-centered rites of passage in their local communities all throughout Baltimore. We'll train them in phase one, and then train them side by side in a first group of young people. This summer, we'll actually be going through rites of passage right here in Baltimore. And then, to your point, each year from then on, our initial trained group of men will go out to their communities and begin working with groups of young men, and we'll continue sort of spreading that cycle year over year until we have an army of men in this city who are trained, understand the power of African-centered rites of passage, understand that matriculation into manhood is a process, and there should be a community, really a community standard of what it means to be in community, which is, again, one of the things that has been snatched from us over the years, is that sort of sense of community has been taken away and replaced by a lot of the things that we've talked about already. But this is a really, really powerful project. There's a celebration, Armstrong, that we have coming up in April, as a matter of fact, that will actually introduce this first set of men who have gone through their rites of passage, and it's sort of a welcome back into community. We call that the rites of incorporation. That's actually taking place on Saturday, April the 13th, right here in Baltimore at the Baltimore Unity Hall. So we're looking for sponsors. We want community to show up and really celebrate and affirm these men who have signed up to do really, really important work with and on behalf of young black men here in Baltimore. So more information about that celebration and how to get involved overall with the project can be found at mentormddc.org/BROPI, BROPI, and we need folks to get in the game.
How do we, Dayvon, because, you know, one of the things that is very fortunate for some young people is that they get an opportunity to go inside corporations and intern and gain experience and see a different part of the world, just like here at Fox 45, getting them to come into a newsroom to see how it operates, to see how news formulates, how it goes through the copy before it gets on the actual screen, or go to the Baltimore Sun newsroom to see how news and editorials and how you get and put papers out for kids so they can begin to get a slice of the things that they really want to become and things that get them excited. Because one thing about young people, especially young boys, you need to keep their attention. They're sort of the social media generation. And so, but once they find something they like, because for us, it's amazing how many young brothers have gone through our internship programs and the different things that we do, whether it's videography, whether it's taping, but when they see their story, it's on the air, when they see something they've written in the newspaper, it gives them excitement. I mean, not being able to write in the beginning, but they realize what it gives them. If they can write it, they can write copy, and you teach them. It takes a lot of work, but when these kids are in real life, and then you pay them, you make it worth their time. How do we get these kids involved in these corporations, in these enterprises, so they can get these real life experiences while you're doing the same thing that you're doing?
Yeah.
So, the importance of rites of passage is understanding that culture is not just a reference, it's a resource. that a lot of times when people think about culture, you think merely about the mere artifacts of culture, but not culture and thinking about the civilizational contributions that people of African descent make that are marked as high levels of civilization that would instill the level of pride. Part of what I think happens in our community is that a lot of young people are socialized to see themselves, their communities, their families even, as sites of pathology, and that the more distance they can create culturally, socially from their community, the more successful they are. One of the things about rites of passage is what it teaches young people is that you embrace your community, you embrace your family. And, all people, have things that could be better, in terms of things to improve, but you recognize the strengths that exist in the community exists and its history. So part of, for us, when we think about rites of passage, is teaching young people that you don't have to, assimilate into larger culture, right? You can engage the society from a position of strength and power and recognize that as people of African descent, we need the ability to protect our interests from larger society that has weaponized itself against it.
Actually, you're losing me now. I want to make sure I understand what you're saying. Are you advocating isolation, that you can create your own community among yourselves and not engage the rest of the world?
Yeah, I'm saying that we should engage the world from a position of strength. Young people are often told that in order to
how do you define the position of strength?
Young people are often told that the more distance you create socially and culturally from your community, that's success. I made it out. I got to make it out the community. What I'm saying is that what appeals to our young people is that you can be you. You can connect and relate to your family and community, but you can do it in a way that connects to the best of your community, in a way that when you go into the boardroom in these corporate environments, like I've been doing legislative advocacy for more than 10 years at this point. And when I go into those spaces, because of the excellence that I'm able to project, because of the rigor of my training, right? Because of the fact that my work is connected to a pride in my community, right? That I don't feel like I got to distance myself from the community from which I come in Baltimore City, but I can embrace the fact that there are strengths to my community. I go into those rooms unafraid, right? I don't have to assimilate in a way that I have to take on the culture of the environment, but I come in with a strong sense of understanding of how the system works, a strong sense of what my community needs, and navigate it from that basis. And so a big part of rites of passage is we teach young people it's important for you to take pride in your community, right? Take pride in who you are and who your people are, and engage larger society from a position of strength, just like any other cultural group would do. Any other cultural group, they take pride in themselves. That don't mean they isolate themselves from the larger community. That just means that they understand that any coalition, any engagement they have in larger society does not require them to compromise the integrity and pride in who they are as a people. And I would argue that in Baltimore City, one of the greatest challenges we have is that we need, and I'm appreciative of the fact that we're talking about rites of passage in a public setting, right, in a way we could talk about African-centered rights, right? Because I think a lot of times when we introduce culture as a crucial part of what young people need, any people that does human socialization, there are, as Sadiq mentioned, technologies of transitioning young people from childhood to adulthood, where culture is a key part of the architecture of the programming. And I would argue that anybody that does programming with our people, particularly young people, that don't address themselves to the way that this society, not just media, but formal education, right? Whether it's just the things they see around them, the way that law enforcement treats them. These are the ways that young people internalize these notions. I'm a thug, I'm a gang. And so what I'm saying is that when you give people a positive sense of culture, right, that is grounded in real rigorous understanding of the history of our community, our people, that's what's gonna connect to young people. Unfortunately, I think too often young people are told, you gotta assimilate into this society. You gotta be what they want you to be. You have to make yourself smaller. And what I say is that's not how we get our kids.
Help me understand, who is they?
We live in a culture that's dominated by a bunch of folks that don't believe in the power, that there are assets, and anything of value inside our young people. That's what's projected nonstop by they. Again, part of it is the media, part of it is educators in the classroom, because as we just talked about during the break, there's amazing work going on right here in Baltimore City, from charter schools, again, Baltimore Collegiate Academy being one such example. Those examples aren't the run of the mill. Those are few and far between. As we talked about, we need much more examples, right? But there's educational trauma that goes on every single day. There's law enforcement trauma that goes on every single day.
How do you change the educational structure?
So again, I think a lot of it goes back to, first and foremost, the sort of core of this conversation was around.
Do you take the kids
working
out of
with
that
young people.
out of that setting and create your own classroom?
Well,
There's exposure
you're
as
asking a
well.
broader systemic question. I think the issue, when we're talking about they being, we live in a society structured on racism and white supremacy. I know you don't agree with that. But it's important for us to recognize that in that system, it produces the outcomes. It produces the environment that makes notions of black inferiority and white supremacy rational. What we're saying is we need to dispel that from our young people. We need to dispel the propaganda, the formal education, all these different systems. Rites of passage is one such example where young people can be brought into an environment where they're given examples of black men who are highly intelligent, highly functional.
Give us a picture of the outcome of what you're trying to accomplish with students that have already been under your tutelage.
Yeah, so I would just say, and I'll toss it to Dayvon, part of this collective, this Baltimore Rites of Passage initiative, is built upon a multi-decade history of African-centered Rites of Passage programming taking place in Baltimore City already. So I want to make sure that we shout out, again, those shoulders of, those on whose shoulders we stand in this moment. So as a matter of fact, part of the group of men that are initially trained in the Baltimore Rites of Passage initiative actually went through Rites of Passage here in Baltimore as young men themselves 30 years ago. So there's multiple examples of that in our current line. So when you talk about outcomes, this particular brother is a 20-plus year military veteran, served his country honorably, is a family man, is a pillar in his community. When he recently was honorably discharged, came back to Baltimore and said, hey, I want to give back. And it was because of that strong connection to culture and the assets in the community, this sense of self, that was the pull to actually bring him back to Baltimore when, after traveling the world, he could have settled literally anywhere on the planet, but chose to come back home to Baltimore because of that pull.
I actually think we all want the same thing. We don't want anyone to abandon their culture, their identity, and who they are. But we also want to have the best education. Don't want them to be stereotyped as criminals and freeloaders. We believe that they deserve whatever they define as the best opportunity in America without barriers of race and anything else that maligns them that has nothing to do with their skills or their abilities. I think we want that. And I think you need these role models in these communities that these young people can see to make them believe that success belongs to them.
Absolutely.
Okay? But I think so many institutions have failed these kids along the way. And to build these kids and to really make them a part of the fabric of America, culture matters, but you also, in the society that we live in today, it's going to take us all working together as one fabric if we're going to change anything about what this country is. I mean, there are a lot of things that you can look to and say that these kids were damaged by. But what these kids now is hope. Because if they don't have hope that they have an opportunity, this pathology that we see every day is going to continue, and it's just not good.
One of the things that I would add, and I think a lot of what you just said, I think I can buy into. I think one of the things, though, that I think is important to note is that it's always a question of how is it as a people do we relate to the larger society? Mm-hmm. And I would argue that a part of what has happened is that, particularly for people of African descent, there's a way that we are told that we should not think about and practice sovereignty amongst ourselves in order to be able to generate our own relationship to the economy, right? Generate institutions that specifically protect and defend our interests as the basis for entry into the larger society. And a part of what happens is that a lot of our young people, when you think about what success looks like, oftentimes success looks like leaving your community behind. Right, and I would argue that what we want, the young people that come from the program that we're pulling together, is we want young people that understand that your success should be tied to improving the quality of life of your community.
Well, let me just say this. I think it's so important to hear all perspectives in the world. I think your perspective is very important. Glad I had an opportunity to sit down with you. Anything that we can do as broadcast owners, as media owners, or whatever, as brothers, help this process along to save these young people, we want to be a part of that process because it takes all strategic partners from different varying backgrounds to bring their experience, because literally they are in crisis and they need our help, not yesterday, but right now. I want to thank you for joining us when we come
hold
back.
you to that, Brother Armstrong.
Well, you can hold me to that. Bruce Fine and others will join us as we return to talk about other issues. Congratulations on what you do. Victoria Church, do you have a website?
mentormddc.org/BROPI, BROPI. Learn more about the initiative.
Okay, and we'll be back. Freedom, I celebrate it.
Yeah.
I don't believe in censorship. Yes, it's a good thing. Yes, yes, you can say your piece here, but we can work together, brothers. Remember that. Well, Sadiq knows that. I've known Sadiq a long time.
We
Yeah.
just need y'all to stop telling them to put these young kids in jail.
We only want to put criminals in jail.
Yeah.
Those that are.
That's not what the cover says.
Well, listen.
We should have a discussion about that because
Bruce, a mic check, please. Listen.
1, 2, 3, 4,
Don't
5,
judge
6,
us
7,
all with
8,
the same
9, 10.
brush.
yeah, no, I watched you. That's what I'm saying. I watched with this network and I watched what you said. Part of it is like I'm down there. I know what the law says.
Well, if you understand what I say, there's very little you disagree. I'm across the board. I uplift these young men.
All right, we'll talk about
Yeah,
it.
we'll talk about
We did.
I'm glad we met, though, because I can see